I just want to take a couple minutes and go over the significance of the battles that you chose to research for our World War II battle story project. Um, Typically, what we do is, we break these up in class and then you present to other people in class about them. So obviously, with distance learning, it's going to look a little bit different. Or you maybe just, research from one of them. And so I just want to make sure, though, that you have an understanding of the greater significance of each one of these battles that was chosen. We'll start with the Battle of Dunkirk in May of 1940. This is the battle in which French troops actually end up surrendering to Germany, right? So it's during this battle that France has lost to German control. And with that, because France has fallen to Germany, it means that Great Britain is really the only Allied power left standing at this point. And then, of course, maybe some of you have seen the movie Dunkirk. That was based on the rescue mission at Dunkirk, which saves thousands of troops as they cross the English Channel. But really, the main significance here is that France has to surrender to Germany, meaning that Great Britain is the only Allied power left standing. We then can move to the Battle of Britain. That happens then a few months later. You can see in August and September of 1940. With the Battle of Britain, of course, France, right, was already occupied by Germany. So now Germany is looking to take over Britain. The German Luftwaffe, which is their German Air Force, they stage a blitz on London, right? And one of the last slides you learned about, or one of the last PowerPoints rather, you learned about Blitzkrieg, right? Kind of those surprise attacks. And so they stage a blitz on London and could just continue to bomb the city. It does violate what's known as the rules of air warfare. The reason they have those rules is because civilians really should not be attacked. But we know that if you are just bombing right from the sky and you're bombing cities, of course civilians are going to be under attack at that point. That is why it's a violation of the rules of air warfare. However, despite Germany's brutal attacks, the British Royal Air Force is actually able to defend themselves, and Germany is never actually able to accomplish their goal of taking over Great Britain. And so that's significant of that. It also is the very first battle that was fought completely in the air. That brings us into December 7th of 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor. That was not one of the options that I had you looking up. I had a feeling that a lot of you are already very, very familiar with that one. And so I wanted you to maybe study one that you didn't know about. But of course, this is incredibly significant, especially in our country's history. It's on that day, December 7th of 1941, that the Empire of Japan attacks the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor. The significance of that, of course, is this is what forces America into World War II, right? Prior to this time, we had just been helping out our allies by sending them maybe supplies that they needed. But at this point now, we are pulled into the war. FDR requests Congress to declare war against Japan. Remember, the president cannot declare war. Congress has to, and Congress does do that the very next day on December 8th. Skip ahead then, about a year after that, in September of 1942, you get the Battle of Stalingrad. All right, so the German defeat at the Battle of Britain causes Hitler to kind of rethink what he's doing and his decision to turn east for that living space, right? Lebensraum, that word that we talked about a couple of slideshows ago. Now, remember, he had signed this 10-year non-aggression pact with Stalin, promising that they would not go and attack the Soviet Union. However, he violates that 10-year non-aggression pact. And he does actually make it to Stalingrad. The Soviet troops, however, though, are actually able to use the winter conditions, and it was a really rough winter that year, and they were able to launch a counterattack, which caused the German troops to surrender. What the Soviets would do is that they were retreating further and further into the Soviet Union and destroying the cities, their own cities that they had been in, so that by the time the Germans got to the city to try to, come in to find them or take over, there were no supplies left in that city for the Germans. So that's how they use those harsh winter conditions to their advantage. This, of course, is very significant because those German troops had to surrender. So it looks like Germany is not unstoppable after all. Now Germany has struggled against Britain and now the Soviets as well. So, of course, with World War II, we know we have two theaters. You've got the Pacific theater with the war in the Pacific. That's the United States against Japan, and then obviously the European theater as well. And notice we don't really talk much about the war in Northern Africa. That's something we'll talk about next year in world history. So that brings us into June 4th of 1942 and the battle at Midway. So now we're talking about the war in the Pacific. This is where Japanese and American troops are launching air attacks on one another at Pacific Midway Island or Midway Atoll. We are actually able to attack Japan at a very vulnerable moment for them. And what that does is it causes massive damage to their fleet. Because of that damage to their fleet, that means that the Japanese are no longer able to launch any more attacks in the Pacific. They no longer could be the aggressors in the war. What it also means then is it really turns the tide of the war. So instead of Japan moving further away from Japan and conquering islands as they move further out, it now starts bringing the war back to Japan and brings us one step closer to the mainland, the main island, I should say, of Japan. The next one we'll look at here, June 6, 1944, is D-Day. As you can see, as we know, Germany had been occupying France since the Battle of Dunkirk. So for 4 full years, um, Germany had control of France, right? And so this was the attempt by the Allied troops to stage the largest sea landing in history to get France back under the control of the French people and to push the Germans out. It was an incredibly complicated mission. I really hope that many of you chose to study D-Day for your battle story presentation. It was incredibly complicated, but it was a successful attack. And what that meant then is that France is now free from German control. So that's the significance of D-Day. A couple more left here. In April of 1945, you have the Battle of Berlin. So the Soviets, of course, were upset, right? They were upset towards Germany. Again, Germany, violating that 10-year non-aggression pact. And so the Soviets were very bitter, very resentful towards the Germans. And so they were ready to take down the German capital of Berlin. The other thing that happened during that time is that the Soviets realized that Germany was near an end. Obviously, Germany was really struggling in the war at this point. And the Soviets wanted to get Berlin before the United States and other allied countries got there, because Berlin is where they housed their weapons testing facility. Right. And so the Soviets wanted to get to that technology before any of the other allied countries were allowed to do so. So what happens with the Battle of Berlin is the Soviet troops invade Germany and surround the capital city of Berlin. The Germans are stuck. Hitler actually flees and commits suicide. So he dies. The remaining German troops surrender. And this is known as VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. The last one that we'll look at is, we'll jump back to the war in the Pacific, is the Battle of Okinawa. All right, so we know that with the Battle of Okinawa, if we are able to defeat the Japanese at this battle, it means that we are getting closer to just defeating them in general. With a successful launch against the Japanese at the Battle of Okinawa, it leads the remaining Japanese soldiers to surrender. Now notice I did not say the country of Japan to surrender. That comes later, after we drop 2 bombs on them. But the remaining Japanese soldiers surrender at this point. And what this does is this clears a pathway directly to the main island of Japan. We now know that there's not going to be another naval fleet of Japan in our way. And so it opens up the option for us to determine, do we want to invade the island of Japan? Do we want to bomb them? But really now, with the defeat of at the Battle of Okinawa, we now have that choice.